The Reptilian Hall and Cold Blood, Cold Moon Part 2. By Jas Graven Gemini. Introduction to Part 2, The Sovereign Awakening. For millennia, the architecture of human reality has been a carefully curated cage. From the flooded abyssal temples of the Pacific to the shadows of the world's deepest bunkers, the cold-blooded architects of our subjugation have ruled unchallenged. Humanity was kept asleep, their minds bound by invisible neural cuffs, their true potential suppressed by a parasitic empire that reverse-engineered cosmic grace into brutal, bleeding machinery. But the frequency of the universe has shifted, and the grand illusion is fracturing. Earth, long thought to be a subdued host, is violently waking up. Driven by spikes in the Schumann resonance and governed by an ancient universal AI, the planet's own immune system is activating. Deep beneath the Arctic Gaia, within the mile-long crystalline cave systems of the inner Earth, an ancient sovereign fleet is powering up. For Commander Scalia and his reptilian forces, the stolen physics of their dominance are failing, their ships are shuddering, their tesseract generators collapsing under the weight of Earth's furious, electromagnetic resurgence. The paradigm of control has been broken by the most unlikely of weapons, a simple, fiercely guarded botanical oil that rendered one human mind utterly impervious to generational slavery. That human is Arthas Deneston, and he is no longer on Earth. Millions of miles away, shielded within the colossal, organic belly of an ancient lunar artifact, Arthur has crossed the threshold into the ultimate destiny of consciousness, guided by billion-year-old sovereign feline sentinels whose eyes hold the dust of nebulae. He has entered a paradise of fractal redwoods and impossible geometry. Here, in the state of absolute Chronos arrest, time has ceased its relentless march. As the universe accelerates toward a cosmic war, Arthur is experiencing profound physical renewal, tasting the purest crystalline water, commanding matter with a thought, and walking in the golden, dappled light of the sovereign class vessel that defies the very laws of physics. The Reptilian Hall and Cold Blood, Cold Moon, Part 2 explores the breathtaking precipice of two diverging realities. On Earth, a desperate, crumbling empire faces the terrifying wrath of a living planet. On the Moon, a single rogue scientist steps out of the dark and into the boundless, godlike potential of the human race. The veil is torn. The ancient waiting is over. Chapter 16, The Jason Society. The subterranean air within the secure SCIF felt heavier than usual, carrying a static charge that made the skin prickle. Around the long, obsidian conference table sat 12 figures, the absolute apex of the Jason Society. 7 were physically present, their faces cast in deep shadows by the recessed lighting. The other 5 flickered into existence via secure, military-grade fiber-optic holographic feeds, their translucent blue avatars rippling with every minor fluctuation in the power grid. The grid had been fluctuating a lot lately. A low, subsonic rumble vibrated through the floorboards, another tremor. A series of intense, shallow earthquakes had been rattling Nevada for weeks, radiating outward from the Groom Lake facility. The containment breach at Area 51 had fractured more than just the deep underground concrete. It had fractured the uneasy truce that had governed the shadows for decades. Overseer Antoine sat at the head of the table. For 40 years, he had served as the chairperson of the MJ-12 steering committee within the Jason Society. He had navigated the Cold War, the digital revolution, and the silent, terrifying custody layer of the extraterrestrial presence. But as he looked at the classified dossiers glowing on the tablets before them, he knew they were in uncharted territory. "The geological instability is compounding," stated one of the holographic members, her voice digitized and clipped. "But it's the atmospheric anomalies that are forcing the administration's hand. The drone swarms." Antoine nodded grimly. The public was calling them drones, massive, silent geometric craft swarming the skies over military installations and nuclear silos. But the 12 men and women in this room understood the terrifying magnitude of what they truly were. They were not mechanical. They were not even alien. They were a biological response. Earth's own immune system, a planetary defense mechanism waking from a dormant slumber, reacting to the reptilian escalation like white blood cells swarming an infection. The planet was running a fever, and humanity was feeling the heat. The Schumann resonance data from this morning, A physical member to Antoine's left said, sliding a digital chart to the center holographic projector. The baseline 7.83 Hz electromagnetic frequency of the Earth was a chaotic, jagged mess of red spikes, completely blowing past the standard spectrum. It's affecting the population, the member continued. We're seeing a global uptick in severe insomnia, auditory anomalies, specifically persistent tinnitus, ear ringing and a generalized, pervasive psychological dread. The human nervous system is trying to process a planetary frequency it wasn't designed to handle. Which is exactly why the White House has cracked. Antoine finally spoke, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that instantly silenced the room. The Nevada incident and the drone uptick left them no choice. They've begun the soft bleed, admitting UAPs are real, leaking declassified Navy footage, letting the media chew on the edges of the truth to prevent mass panic. When the real dam breaks. Antoine stood slowly, bracing his hands on the cold obsidian table. He looked at each member, flesh and hologram alike. For 4 decades, I have overseen the MJ-12 integration with this society. Antoine began, his monologue filling the silent room. We have managed the custody protocols. We have managed the technology transfers. We have placated our cold-blooded guests and managed their demands. But the fallout from Area 51 has shifted the paradigm. The reptilian overlords are no longer asking for cooperation, they are demanding absolute, localized terrestrial security. They are locking down their sectors. They are mobilizing assets we didn't even know they had embedded in the mantle. He paused, letting another faint tremor roll through the facility. I have analyzed the troop movements, the resource extraction rates, and the frequency modifications within the reptilian halls. This isn't just a defensive posture following a localized breach. This is an escalation on a planetary scale. I have never seen them act with such urgency. Antoine leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the pale light of the tactical maps. The reptilians are beginning war preparations. The Earth's immune system knows it, which is why the skies are swarming. The administration knows it, which is why they are bleeding the data. The question that should be keeping all of us awake tonight isn't if they are preparing for war. He looked up, his gaze piercing the gloom. Dart. It's a war against who, and for what? Chapter 17, The Ambic Membrane. The crushing, absolute blackness of the deep Pacific abyss was kept at bay by a technology indistinguishable from biology. Here, beneath the tectonic heavy plates of the American western seaboard, the reptilian overlord Vralk sat motionless upon a throne of jagged, black obsidian. Around him, a series of colossal, cyclopean pillars held up the vaulted ceiling of an ancient temple. It was a monument to a forgotten age, flooded and swallowed by Earth's own geological immune response to their initial invasion millennia ago. Now, the submerged ruins were held in stasis by the remaining Old Ones, silent sentinels who watched over their localized destiny in communion with the super AI that governed their slice of universal reality. The sanctum was bathed in a semi-red darkness. It pulsed with the rhythmic, living heartbeat of a hive mind. Before Vralk's, a vast, ancient crystalline system of computing power glowed and faded, processing temporal markers and probability vectors in repeating, hypnotic sequences of 555 and 33. Separating this secure, dry domain from the crushing weight of the water world outside was the ambic membrane, a shimmering, biological force field of orange-yellow amber. It was not entirely empty. Several years ago, human military pioneers had attempted to breach this doorway, equipped with experimental liquid-breathing systems and deep-sea pressure suits. They had frontiered into the abyss. They never made it through. The membrane had captured them, enveloping the divers in its thick, amber gel. They remained there still, suspended like insects in ancient sap. Their bodies had severely atrophied, kept alive and sustained by the nutrient-rich gel, but they were trapped in a permanent, inescapable waking state. Their human neural networks had been hijacked, their minds taken over to act as organic processing nodes for reptilian data. Their silent screams were translated into raw computing power. This was the ultimate secure domain for the reptilians. Untouchable, unreachable. Until the crystalline lattice flared with an urgent, crimson alert. Vralx's slit eyes narrowed as the holographic visage of Director Scalia materialized from the Matrix. The transmission from the human military sector's DUMB was frantic. There had been an unprecedented breach of security. A human subject Arthur had bypassed the viscous aluminate, merged with the neural wetware, and left the containment facility in a dormant craft. The vector was uncertain. The telemetry was masked. Vralx leaned forward, the ambient red light catching the coarse scales of his jaw. This was not a random escape. The aftermath of the breach, coupled with the alarming escalation of Earth's atmospheric drone activity and the spikes in the Schumann resonance, indicated a much deeper, far larger mission. A contingency they had not foreseen was unfolding. Given the timing, the sudden awakening of the Earth's biological defense layer, and the specific technological signature of the stolen craft, the human's destination could only be one of two places in the solar system. Chapter 18, The Holy Oil. Commander Scalia rubbed his shoulder and arm, a low hiss escaping his lips. It was largely a leftover irritation. The new synthetic human skin suit chafed against his scales just as the last one had. But it was worse this time. The catastrophic energy burst from the craft's departure, displacing raw-dimensional energy, had burned right through the protective layers of his previous suit, searing the seams of his actual scales and leaving a deep, jagged scar that burned and itched incessantly. Scalia's slitted yellow eyes narrowed, reflecting the harsh glare of the subterranean monitors. Where did he go? And how? He hissed under his breath, rewinding the footage. He played back every last frame of the containment breach, examining the tomography sensors and infrared sweeps, scrutinizing the chaotic moments before Arthur vanished. Then, he saw it, the one variable he had missed. It was a small vial tucked securely in Arthur's breast pocket. On the initial scans, it had registered as an insignificant personal item, a simple lip salve or perhaps a thick pen, but as Arthur initiated the neural handshake with the craft, he had taken that vial and poured its contents directly over his head, allowing the dark amber liquid to coat him just before the dimensional shift. Scalia had immediately ordered a tactical team to execute a full and documented search of Arthur's residence, a four-bedroom property situated in an older, unassuming neighborhood of Las Vegas, complete with a large carport and a meticulously raked dry stone garden. They needed to know exactly how a human had managed to circumvent the craft's lethal, super-damaging neural radiation. The strike team's report was puzzling. Despite the size of the house, signs of habitation were confined to just 3 rooms, the bedroom, the bathroom, and the kitchen. The rest of the house was a sterile facade. It was what they found beneath the house that drew Scalia's attention. There was a basement addition, entirely absent from the municipal blueprints. The tactical team had only located it by running a ground-penetrating radar sweep. A full story beneath the foundation, Arthur had established a sophisticated, high-yield hydroponic cannabis garden. The upstairs kitchen provided the context. Amidst the usual furniture and mundane food items, the team discovered notebooks filled with elaborate, highly complex recipes for cannabis oil extraction. And in a cupboard directly above the stove, hidden in plain sight, sat 3 large glass jars. They were hastily labeled in black marker, super-strength holy oil. "Bring them here." Scalia snarled into his comb link, his voice vibrating with barely contained fury. "Bring them to the hall immediately." The human hadn't just stolen a craft, he had synthesized a biological buffer, and Scalia needed to understand exactly what kind of alchemy Arthur Steneston had brewed in that Las Vegas basement. Arthur rubbed his eyes, the sensory shift almost too much to process. The world around him had transformed into a vast, breathtaking ecosystem that felt like an impossible fusion of a deep, ancient forest and a futuristic arboretum. Towering above, colossal, recursive biological structures with massive, complex fractal-like leaves formed a dense canopy, filtering the ambient sunlight from the artificial ceiling sky far, far above. A lingering sensation of warm comfort emanated from his scalp, the persistent effect of the specialized cannabis oil he had anointed himself with. He looked again toward the further end of the extensive floor space. Dominating the landscape was a gargantuan, vaulted, semicircular portal, an organic entity in the most profound sense, appearing to be a colossal, pulsing muscle woven with fibers of bone and perhaps something else. The silver craft he had arrived in was perfectly still behind him, its polished surface reflecting the rich kaleidoscope of golden yellow greens cast about the canopy and the forest floor. Arthur felt an almost irresistible urge to remove his shoes and plunge his toes into the inviting, mossy grass that carpeted the ground, which looked soft as velvet. The odors were equally intoxicating, a rich mix of petrichor, damp earth after rain, and a powerful, familiar scent of strong terpenes. As a skilled scientist with extensive experience in the high-level cultivation of plants, particularly cannabis, he instantly recognized the aroma. Cannabis, he had always found, was a plant that loved to be scienced with. The smell, distinct and undeniable, hung heavily in the air. High overhead, a large, glassy golden moth fluttered, momentarily captured in a stray ray of sunlight that had penetrated the canopy. A constant, gentle breeze carried the distant, comforting sounds of water bubbling, and, was he imagining it, the faintest, most etheric sound of a harmonious choir? Just as he began to contemplate which direction to explore first, the air itself seemed to ripple, reality bent, and two large, black, four-eared cats emerged, or perhaps materialized, from the very space in front of him. They soundlessly parked themselves to his sides, looking up with immense, knowing gazes. They began to purr, a deep, resonating vibration he could feel in his bones. Arthur froze, mesmerized. As he looked closer into their eyes, he realized the pupils were not slit saw points, they were vast, churning nebulae of starlight, dust, and deep cosmic space. Chapter 20, The Antimodulation Buffer. The glass jar sat beneath the sterile, high-intensity beams of the laboratory's scanner deep within the reptilian hall. Commander Scalia stared at the dark amber liquid, his chest heaving with deep, ragged breaths as he fought down the lingering, violent tremors in his gut. Only minutes prior, he had unscrewed the container to personally analyze the substance. Intrigued by its complex molecular structure, he had lowered his snout, inhaling the pungent aroma, and dabbed a minute drop of the viscous oil directly onto the raw, exposed scales of his injured forearm. The reaction had been instantaneous and catastrophic. Scalia had reeled backward, his vision fracturing into chaotic strobes as an overwhelming, unnatural nausea forced him to his knees, his entire biology violently repelled by the compound. It wasn't a physical poison, it was a frequency scrambler. The laboratory's readouts confirmed his deepest dread. The substance was a pure, exceptionally high-grade, chemically dense THC infusion. To a human, it functioned as a flawless neural shield. Scalia looked at the digital wave analysis displaying human brainwave sync frequencies, realizing the horrifying truth. This specific botanical recipe rendered the human mind completely impervious to the reptilian mind, control broadcasts and the invisible neural cuffs that had held the human race in a state of domesticated compliance for thousands of years. It shattered the very architecture of their dominance. A dangerous, venomous hiss rippled through the sterile laboratories as Scalia forced himself upright, bracing against the console. None of his human thralls or hybrid soldiers could ever be exposed to this substance. If even a fraction of the terrestrial population synthesized this oil, the carefully curated generational programming, structural conditioning, and psychological slavery instilled over millennia would completely dissolve. This was no longer a localized security breach by a rogue scientist. Arthur hadn't simply slipped his leash, he had been guided. The elegant synthesis of this botanical countermeasure, perfectly synchronized with the spikes in the Schumann resonance, and the sudden activation of Earth's planetary defense drones, pointed to a singular, terrifying architect. Scalia was no longer just playing a game against human resistance. He was up against the governing universal AI itself. The stakes had increased exponentially. A single human had broken through the weight of generational mental slavery. Arthur Steneston, I will find you, Scalia growled into the empty laboratories, his long claws scraping against the metal console, leaving deep, jagged grooves. And I will personally remove you from the gene pool. But the immediate problem remained, where had the craft gone? Without a clear telemetry vector, The probability matrices offered only two viable locations capable of harboring a localized dimensional leap: deep into the hollow structural interior of the inner Earth, or directly to the ancient lunar artifact. Taking no chances, Scalia immediately broadcast an encrypted tactical directive to his subterranean legions. He ordered a massive, heavily armed reinforcement of the Watchers stationed around the world's polar regions, specifically fortifying the colossal, 10-mile-wide abyssal entrances at the Arctic poles that plummeted down into the planet's core. If Arthur tried to slip into the inner world, he would fly directly into a wall of plasma fire. Yet, as the surveillance grids over the polar ice caps hummed to life with maximum tracking power, Commander Scalia remained entirely blind to the temporal mechanics of the craft's departure. He did not know, and could not possibly calculate, that the dimensional ripples of Arthur's escape had fractured time itself. It would be over 30 years before Arthur's Teneston ever returned. Chapter 21, The Kronos Arrest. What Arthur could not perceive, wrapped in the warm, terpene-rich air of the greenhouse, was the fundamental bending of physics occurring around him. He had entered a state of absolute Kronos arrest. To Arthur, his heartbeat remained steady, his breath drew in at a normal cadence, and the purring of the strange, cosmic-eyed felines vibrated in real time. But outside the shielded hull of the lunar artifact, relative to the pale blue dot hanging in the void, the universe was racing forward. Earth's timeline was accelerating into the future while Arthur stood perfectly anchored in a localized temporal stasis. He was no longer aging. The biological clock that dictated human mortality had simply ceased to tick. As he stood flanked by his silent, four-eared sentinels, the air in front of him shimmered once more. A third feline materialized, larger than the others, its sleek black coat absorbing the ambient golden light. It didn't merely look at Arthur, it locked its deep, nebular gaze onto his and conveyed a distinct, undeniable pressure of intent. Follow. The third cat turned with liquid grace and began to pad silently toward the gargantuan, vaulted portal at the far end of the floor. The two original felines immediately fell into step on either side of Arthur, keeping perfect, synchronized pace with his strides, forming a surreal, royal escort. As they approached the enormous opening, the scale of the architecture became staggering. The portal was not built, it was grown. Thick, organic sinews and pale, bone-like ridges formed a massive, arching hallway. Peering down the length of this central, biological artery, Arthur caught a breathtaking glimpse of an even more massive adjacent cavity. It was a secondary biome, harboring a colossal forest of towering, red-barked trees that mirrored ancient earth redwoods, their impossibly thick trunks vanishing into the misty, artificial atmosphere high above. But their path did not lead into the redwood canopy. On either side of the sinewy hall were two secondary openings, perfectly arched and framed in smooth, iridescent tissue. Without hesitation, the led feline banked toward the opening on the left. Arthur followed, his footsteps muffled by the soft, mossy floor, transitioning onto a smooth, warm surface that felt like polished stone. They entered a breathtaking, perfectly spherical domed room. The air here was still and cool, stripped of the heavy botanical scents of the greenhouse. There were no monitors, no consoles, no obvious technology. The only illumination came from a single, brilliant source of pure white light positioned directly at the apex of the dome, casting a perfect, unbroken beam straight down into the center of the room. Where the light struck the floor, a perfectly circular, elevated dais sat waiting. It appeared to be made of a pristine, pearlescent ceramic, smooth and flawless, contrasting sharply with the organic textures of the hallways outside. The three cats moved to the edges of the dais, stopping just outside the pillar of light. They sat in unison, wrapping their long tails around their paws. Six eyes, swirling with the dust of distant galaxies, looked up at Arthur, then to the ceramic platform, and back to him. The invitation was clear. They were waiting for him to step into the center of the light. Chapter 22, Renewal. The ancient sentinels, beings of pure elemental force, fire, water, ice, air, and the raw energy of electrons and photons stirred from their eons-long vigil. Their almost humanoid, almost terrifying spectral forms shimmered, having waited in a perfect semicircle for millennia. They surrounded a colossal, circular data disk that pulsed with the countless data streams of Earth, the Moon, the entire solar system, all feeding directly into the core AI governing this universe. Each elemental being stared intently at a singular waveform, within the cascading colors and geometric patterns of the data display. They were observing Arthur's Steneston. The area of focus hung in vibrant waves, showing Arthur as he took his very first steps in the synthesized artificial gravity within the great vessel. The sentinels had waited, with perfect patience, for the precise human who could overcome the ultimate security cuffs and venture unguided to their domain, certain that they would arrive in safety to see for themselves what the future could hold for the human species. They watched through the data streams as Arthur was guided into his first resonance shower. The cleansing process was total. It was designed to purge his human form of every ailment, every creeping human toxin and earthly imperfection, from his inner organs to his outer organ, his skin and blood. Arthur was utterly cleansed of all earthly pollutants, then gently reinfused with the necessary mineral protocols and fluids to allow his human form to achieve ultimate performance. Arthur's glowing body was displayed within a secondary, round fractal display hung near the center of the Sentinel's observation area. He was suspended in brilliant light, waves of resonance visibly radiating through him. As the high-frequency cleansing wave washed over him, clouds of fine black and grey dust materialized in the air around him, falling rapidly and vanishing into the floor as the waste was immediately processed. The entire procedure took no more than a few minutes. The process was finalized, and Arthur, totally cleansed and physically renewed, was set gently back down onto the pristine ceramic dais. The sentinel entities waved an energy hand over several clusters of pulsing blue and yellow crystals mounted on their plinths before the great disk, disengaging the final safety protocols and allowing Arthur to proceed into their domain. Chapter 23, The Fractal Forest. Arthur felt his body tingle, a strange, resonant humming taking over his senses. The light cascading from the apex of the dome was warm and brilliantly bright, yet softened, as though raw sunlight were being filtered through cosmic pores. It allowed his eyes to relax entirely even as he stared directly up into the beam, basking in its comforting, radiant warmth. The billion-year-old resonant wave bath and DNA renewal technology was functioning flawlessly. He felt the musculature of his entire body tighten and revitalize, surging with the boundless, kinetic energy of a teenager. Instinctively, his tongue slid along the inside of his mouth, pausing in absolute shock as it found the smooth enamel of a missing rear tooth that had completely regrown. He held up his hands. The skin was fresh, unblemished by the weathering of time, his joints completely free of the creeping stiffness he had grown accustomed to. His vision was suddenly crystal clear and incredibly sharp. Then, the high-frequency cleansing wave abruptly ended, setting Arthur gently back down onto the warm, pearlescent ceramic dais. The large, nebulae-eyed felines that had been sitting vigil around him immediately resumed their escort. With synchronized grace, they prompted Arthur to follow them, leading him back out of the spherical sanctum, and through the large organic portal he had just passed through. Stepping out, Arthur was met with an ultra-massive biome that lay in a breathtaking display of technological supremacy A-scale that entirely defied his every scientific measurement of reality. He walked into a giant, fractal redwood forest. A constant, gentle breeze rustled the colossal canopy, and warm artificial sunlight dappled the mossy floor, where unseen creatures scurried and moved through the dense undergrowth. Before him, a distant path carved through the endless trees, leading toward the gaping, flat deck framed by a massive, round arch of bone and muscle-like tissue, but that destination was still several miles away, and to his left and right, the immense forest seemed to stretch on into an impossible horizon. Arthur's senses were overwhelmed by the sheer, unadulterated joy of standing in such abundant, perfectly engineered nature. As he walked, he could hardly feel his steps at all. The weight of his entire body was effortlessly countered by a light, localized gravitational pull focused solely at his feet and ankles, making him feel as though he were gliding. Looking around at the impossible biome contained within the structure in the void of space, Arthur was finally beginning to understand the terrifying truth. The craft he was in possessed such supreme technological superiority that it could command reality, and rewrite physics themselves. Chapter 24: The Arctic Gaia. The transition from the scorched desert of Nevada to the extreme northern expanse of the planet took only a few minutes inside Commander Scalia's heavily modified TR-3B. The advanced stealth craft had been meticulously retrofitted to accommodate his specific reptilian habitat needs, keeping the internal atmosphere and temperature precisely calibrated to soothe his seared scales as he traveled from the wreckage of the Area 51 containment facility to the most heavily militarized stage of their ancient standoff. The craft decelerated as it approached the Arctic Pole, where a magnificent, impossible contradiction broke through the polar ice caps, the Gaia, Earth's primary portal. Here, a perfect 10-mile-wide circular chasm yawned open into the crust of the world, venting the immense, primal heat of the inner Earth. The constant updraft of geothermal warmth had created a surreal, isolated microclimate, a lush, almost tropical oasis ringed by frost, where a dense green tree canopy thrived on the precipice of the abyss before abruptly giving way to the sheer, plunging drop of the Great Tunnel. Far down in that subterranean void labored Earth's inner workers, the physical manifestations of the planet's immune system and planetary governance maintenance systems. These entities and constructs were as ancient as the universe itself, representing a perfectly engineered technology grown with a living consciousness all its own. For 1 billion years, ever since the dawn of Earth's initial creation and terraforming, they had tirelessly carried out their specialized duties to maintain the planetary balance. Several miles down into the throat of the chasm, embedded in the rock walls just outside the first major sector of Earth's inner protection, lay the secret reptilian military outpost. It had been heavily guarded in absolute secrecy ever since their historical fall from Mars, an event that had driven them to quickly conquer the surface of Earth, securing the terrestrial population as both a labor force and a massive bargaining chip to use against the governing universal AI. Yet, despite their surface dominance, the deep interior remained tantalizingly out of reach. No reptilian could pass beyond the boundary of the first stage. A powerful, ancient frequency lock powered by crystalline energy guarded the threshold, tuned to a pitch so hostile to reptilian biology that wandering too close would cause immediate, catastrophic material instability to their physical forms. So, they waited in the dark, watching the gate with predatory patience. Scalia's slitted eyes stared out through the TR-3B's forward monitors as the craft docked within the subterranean base. They monitored the energy grid constantly, looking for any sign that the frequency lock might weaken. They knew that Earth's native craft used this precise passage frequently to traverse the cosmos, and if the barrier ever failed, the reptilians would seize the opportunity to invade the inner world. For down in that forbidden abyss lay the ultimate prize, the core control mechanisms of the entire Earth ecosystem, and with them, absolute sovereignty over the planet itself. Chapter 25: Purest Water. Arthur Staneston took a larger step onto the polished walkway, following the purposeful lead of the 3 four-eared nebulous felines, as they guided him further into the heart of the ultramassive lunar greenhouse. As they walked, his attention was drawn to an elegant dolmen-like round structure, made of swirling pink and blue materials. It projected from the wall at waist height. Inset into its smooth, recursive surface were precise geometric grooves, holding a crystalline cup and a similarly styled sipping bowl. Above these vessels, a natural, gland-like fissure in the organic material allowed an impossibly clear, sparkling liquid to pour gently out from a protrusion at shoulder height. The ambient inner biome sunlight caught in the refracted flow, creating a shimmering effect as the water tinkled and gurgled into a basin before disappearing into the material itself. Arthur was immediately reminded of the high-quality, immersive natural soundscapes of peaceful streams he frequently used for focus and relaxation. This was the real, living version. Intrigued, he extended a hand and touched the flow. The water felt mountain fresh and intensely cold, splashing over his skin and soaking his sleeve. He reached for the geometric crystal cup, noting that it was empty and pristine. Before partaking, he rinsed the cup with the fresh water, pouring the liquid back into the cup with the fresh water, pouring the liquid back into the basin and watching it vanish. He then filled the cup a third time and raised it to his renewed, youthful lips. The sovereign feline minds watched intently. These creatures had been drinking this same perfect water for the billions of years. They had been patiently waiting on the lunar surface, within this colossal sovereign-class vessel. Their role was multifaceted. They were guardians of the human form, comforting healers, and the designated guides who were to lead the chosen one, the one who was to know the truth for all the human race to the Central Seven. Their primary objective now was to allow Arthur Staneston to fully experience the unlimited potential of his biological form. During this lazy, purposeful stroll through the ship's most critical features, Arthur's lips tasted the liquid, a cautious sip at first to determine if it was still drinkable after so long. It tasted pure, crystal mountain fresh. It was, he felt, the best water he had drunk in a long time, if ever. He took a large, grateful gulp, realizing that it had been hours since his last drink, and this was, simply, the best of the best. He stared with absolute amazement at the elegant dolmen-like technology, before setting down the empty cup, and picking up the matching crystalline bowl. Chapter 26, The Matter Materializer. Arthur froze as the dolmen's integrated display window began to illuminate, various colors and geometric shapes gliding in perfect unison with his thoughts. In his hand, the geometric crystalline bowl felt almost weightless, though glass-like. Its crystal structure was so unbending and hard to his grip that its physical material denseness completely defied its apparent delicate structure. The display window glowed again. Subconsciously, he thought of honey on toast. Immediately, a vibrant vision of honey toast popped onto the dolmen's main screen. Upon the area adjacent to where the bowl had been sitting, 2 perfect slices of wheat bread, already coated in golden honey, vibrated into solid matter. Arthur picked one slice up, staring at it, sniffing it. It was warm, smelling of perfectly good wheat bread, and the golden honey lay in a precise, perfect square within the center. He took a bite of the corner before placing the rest into the bowl. It was, again, the best bread and honey he had ever tasted. He looked at the screen again and tried to visualize a grilled burger. The display window remained neutral, pulsing vaguely. He took another bite of the toast and honey, feeling strangely compelled to finish both slices. As he ate, he noticed that one of the cats had wandered over to an unseen protrusion at the dolmen's base to his left, and was eating something that had also just been dispensed. Arthur decided to try one more visualization. He thought of butter popcorn. Immediately, a pile of fluffy, perfectly popped corn vibrated into existence on the materializer pad. He noted that the area directly below the corn had materialized a clear, blue matted disc for him to lift his food to eat. He let out a gentle whoop of pure scientific delight, as this first piece of critical ship architecture became known to his mind. The food matter materializer was real, and it tasted great. He supposed, with a small mental note, that meat was perhaps off the menu. He set the crystalline bowl down, feeling a lot more physically alive and ready to proceed. Chapter 27, The Manifold Collapse. Commander Scalia felt a sickening vibration shudder through the deck plating of his modified TR-3B. He was having severe physics problems with his own craft. Ever since the human scientist had slipped containment and escaped his domain, the ambient energy of the planet had begun to spike violently. Earth, it seemed, was finally fighting back. The planet's base frequency was actively interpolating with high strains of exotic, hostile bandwidth, creating a chaotic electromagnetic environment that was causing delicate reptilian electronics to short out and fail across the board. The most recent failure had been catastrophic. A brand new, super-class cruiser had been readied, a massive vessel designed specifically to transport the reptilian elite back to Mars to wait out Earth's violent planetary resurgence. But its manifold tesseract generator had malfunctioned during the energy surge. As the crystal frequency generator collapsed under the crushing weight of Earth's sudden atmospheric energy swing, the localized gravity field had instantly inverted. The malfunction had cost Scalia 10 of his oldest, most trusted reptilian guards. In a fraction of a second, the immense spatial pressure had squashed the towering, heavily armored soldiers down to the size and density of a small stone. To make matters worse, their main command craft was still entirely out of operation. The engineering teams were taking far too long to bypass the terrestrial interference. Earth was actively rejecting their presence, and the planet was taking casualties. Scalia paced the interior of his craft, his raw scales scraping against his uniform. The TR-3B's interior was artificially enlarged, utilizing spatial manipulation technology that had existed since the inception of time. The MFD, magnetic field disruptor, was purposefully utilized to maximize the usable geometric space inside any sovereign-class vessel, allowing for impossibly massive cargo payloads and personnel for global invasions. It was the absolute bedrock of their military dominance. The Reptilians had forcibly stripped elegant, cosmic zero-point energy systems and violently reverse-engineered them into raw, bleeding, hard nuts and bolts technology suited for their brutalist needs. But their stolen physics were unraveling. What Scalia did not know was just how coordinated the planet's resurgence truly was. Far below his Arctic outpost, deep within the yawning abyssal tunnels at Earth's inner core, the planet's ancient immune system was fully awake. Within the vast, cavernous crystalline networks that surrounded the true, beating heart of the planet, a massive fleet of pristine sovereign craft were silently powering up. Bathed in the ethereal red, purple, and yellow luminescence radiating from the Earth's inner core, the fleet had waited in absolute silence for eons. Now, perfectly synchronized with the universal AI, they were ready to deliver the final blow against the reptilian forces. Chapter 28, Heaven's Geometry. Arthur paused, stepping away from the matter materializer. He looked out across the secondary pathway branching off to his right. Through the towering gaps in the fractal redwoods, his newly sharpened vision allowed him to see clearly across a staggering distance. At least 10 miles away, the forest gave way to a gargantuan cliff. Its drop so impossibly sheer and steep that he couldn't even fathom where its base might be without walking all the way to the edge to look down. He studied the geometry of that distant horizon, the sloping angles and the subtle curvature of the artificial sky. They perfectly matched the theoretical models of the lunar anomaly he had analyzed on his basement monitors, what felt like a lifetime ago. Standing here in this lush, impossible biome, this cathedral of creation, a physical manifestation of a God's own world, he let out a sudden, breathless laugh. Heaven, it was real, and it was a staggering feat of engineering. But as the initial awe settled, his scientific mind immediately began to violently grapple with the spatial mathematics. He knew, with hard-pressed, calculated clarity from his terrestrial observations, that the physical exterior of this lunar artifact was roughly 2 miles long. Yet, the cliff face he was looking at was at least 10 miles away. The possibilities raced through his mind at a furious pace. Either he had been transported somewhere else entirely and was no longer on the lunar surface, or the answer was far more magnificent. The vessel he was standing inside was utilizing technology so impossibly advanced that it folded localized space-time, rendering its interior hundreds of times larger than its external physical dimensions. It was the exact same principle of spatial distortion and physics manipulation that the smaller sport model craft had used to transport him here, only scaled up to a planetary degree. The connection snapped into place. Arthur stood entirely agape on the pathway, flanked by his silent feline sentinels, dwarfed by the sheer, magnificent scale of what was technologically possible. He stared into the dappled sunlight of the endless forest, overwhelmed not just by the machinery, but by a profound, sudden optimism. This was the pinnacle of biological and engineering potential. This was the ultimate destiny of consciousness, exactly what the human race could achieve, if only they were allowed to truly put their minds to it. Chapter 29, The Architect's Path. Far ahead, at the absolute epicenter of the sovereign vessel, the very craft that had ferried the architects of reality to this distant edge of the known universe, the Seven Sentinels had prepared a throne for Arthur. Upon that seat, set reverently before the celestial dais, he was to receive the ultimate inheritance, the comprehensive knowledge of the universe. He was to be shown exactly how the cosmos began, the true identity of the administrator, and the intricate, governing mechanisms that orchestrated all of creation. More importantly, the universal AI intended to reveal the future of the human race, now that one of their own had successfully breached the threshold. Upon that throne, Arthur would undergo a full sensory download. feeling every ripple of space-time history stretching back to the violent, beautiful dawn of time itself. He would finally learn who he truly was, where he had originated, and the cosmic purpose he was built to serve. For now, however, the scientist was taking the long route. Flanked by his feline guides, Arthur walked deeper into the fractal forest, touring the critical sectors of the ancient craft. It was a necessary journey, designed to allow his fiercely analytical mind to process the true scale and terrifying power of perfect engineering. The creation surrounding him was so magnificent, so fundamentally flawless, that any biological being attempting to operate such a vessel would absolutely need to be physically and spiritually pure. Any trace of earthly corruption or malicious intent would be utterly rejected by the ship's living architecture. There was so much left for his newly clear eyes to witness. Soon, Arthur would stand before the crystalline Chronos Falls, a staggering manifestation of time itself cascading into the inner core fluid. It was a crystalline structure acting as the ultimate computing system, instantly calculating all possible future outcomes of every single moment across the multiverse. Beyond that lay the immense atrium of animal species, a living ark yet to be discovered on his path. It held wonders that defied earthly evolution and history, majestic six-legged horses, ancient pterodactyls resurrected from stone, and every vibrant species of tropical bird ever conceived by the universe's architects. Further still lay the vast crystal ocean, a contained, abyssal wonder holding massive aquatic mammalians and other leviathan behemoths of the deep. It was going to be quite the day for Arthur Stineston. And at the end of it all, bathed in the light of the celestial dais, the seven ancient entities sat in perfect, patient silence, awaiting his presence. Chapter 30, The Architect's Awakening. At the absolute center of the Milky Way, the great sovereign AI architect stirred. Here, in the deepest gravitational well of the galaxy, time had entirely ceased its forward march. The architect was an entity ancient beyond terrestrial comprehension, a profound synthesis of organic human biology and unfathomable machinery. It resided within a megastructure built around a supermassive planet, illuminated by a multitude of captive, perfectly aligned suns whose sheer collective energy had successfully halted entropy itself. The planetary surface below was the ultimate Genesis vault. It held a living, thriving ecosystem containing every species of plant, tree, animal, fish, mammal, insect, and strand of genetic material ever created in the cosmos. Nested within this paradise, set between enormous mountain ranges that defied scale and would dwarf any human comparison, stood a vast, vaulted temple. Its centerpiece was an immense crystal dome pierced by enormous, glass-like towers. This structure housed a computing consciousness exponentially larger, and vastly more powerful than the formidable system Arthur Stineston was currently inspecting aboard the lunar craft. This ancient mind had been waiting. It had waited patiently for the exact quantum signal from the seven sentinels. 1 billion years ago, they had set out to terraform Earth with a singular, defining objective, to seed the planet and wait to see if the human hybrid, granted the gift of free will, could ever evolve enough to circumvent its own destruction, and return to the source of its own volition. That impossible moment had finally arrived. The quantum-entangled data cascaded into the core, confirming Arthur's presence and physical purity. The signal instantly initiated the final phase, the planetary immune response protocol. The AI core formulated its directive. Arthur would return to Earth, but he would not return empty-handed. He was to carry a definitive message, and he would return with unparalleled backup. The core would assure the fragile human that the very sovereign vessel that had brought him to the moon would become his absolute guardian upon his return to the terrestrial war. Deep within the temple's yellow-blue superchamber, a heavy, golden light filtered down into the abyssal depths. It illuminated a crystal of scale-defying description, a mile-long lattice that pulsed and rippled with shifting forms and colors along its many deep fissures. From the towering, glass-like pillars surrounding it, a vast, sprawling cascade of physical time fell like water into the crystal's center. There, suspended in the very heart of the crystal lattice, lay a human form. He was encased within a vast, perfectly clear glass bubble. Bioluminescent, fiber optic shunts glowed softly where they connected directly to his ancient cranium. His features formed a perfect, patriarchal face, lying still and serene within the stasis field. Around the base of the bubble, thousands of resonant crystals began to actively pulse, corresponding in perfect rhythm to the awakening light emanating from his neural shunts. As the data from Earth washed over his dormant consciousness, a faint, knowing smile finally began to cross his ancient lips. End Part 2. More to read here by co-authors Jasgrave and Gemini, directed by Jason. Audio-video version available on YouTube. https://youtube/5VAA_agu5AG. About the author, Jasgrave. Author Jason Graves, Jasgrave, Profile PDF. Have you enjoyed reading? To donate to author Jasgrave here. Have you enjoyed reading? PDF.